Well, hello everyone and welcome to Rhys Thomas Tours. My name is Rhys Thomas. I am a London Blue Badge tourist guide, and right now I am by one of London's most famous and important buildings, the Palace of Westminster, more commonly known as the Houses of Parliament. This is where our government debates. Probably the most famous part of it is the bit covered in scaffolding right now, officially called the Elizabeth Tower after our Queen, more commonly known as Big Ben, which is actually the bell inside the clock tower. It's currently undergoing some much needed restoration works, which is towards the end at last. Now, this space around us is a UNESCO World Heritage Site engulfing the Palace of Westminster. The big church you can see behind me here, this is Westminster Abbey. This is where all our kings and queens have been crowned since William the Conqueror back in 1066. And this green space, which is Parliament Square, which is what I'm here to talk about today. Here in Parliament Square we have sculptures of some of our most important ever politicians and people who have been important for politics, for our nation and our allies throughout the centuries. And I would like to take you through those sculptures today. Now, the man behind me here needs no introduction. This is Sir Winston Churchill, our Prime Minister during the Second World War and our peacetime Prime Minister in the 1950s. One of our most celebrated Britons to have ever lived. Without this man, we would have most likely given up during the Second World War. But this man led the country, not just as our Prime Minister, but also our Minister of Defence. You can learn more about him if you visit the Churchill War Rooms, which is behind the Treasury building you can see just behind me here. It's beneath the ground here. The Churchill War Rooms are one of the top attractions to go and visit. So that's Winston Churchill, our Second World War Prime Minister. And behind him we have the Prime Minister throughout most of the First World War. So here we go. This is David Lloyd George. You can see his coat blowing in the wind here. He was known as the Welsh Wizard. He spoke with a thick Welsh accent, the last Prime Minister to do so. He was our last Prime Minister of the Liberal Party, which have now evolved into the Liberal Democrats. He died during the Second World War, which meant that he didn't get a great state funeral like Sir Winston Churchill, because we couldn't afford to do such elaborate events at the time. Now, the next sculpture we have here in Parliament Square is not a British Prime Minister directly. He was the Prime Minister of South Africa during the Second World War. Jan Christian Smuts. Very important in the Union of South Africa, not the Republic of South Africa that we have today. He was a signatory on the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, and he also signed the UN Charter at the end of the Second World War. So he is the only person to have signed both of those important charters. And he led South Africa at a time during that war. And South Africa don't often get enough credit for their work during that terrible conflict. Now, the next sculpture is of a Prime Minister in the 1800s. This is Viscount Palmerston. You can see his coat draped over his arm. He was a very snappy dresser. Viscount Palmerston was the Prime Minister during the Crimean War in the mid-1800s. And he was the last Prime Minister to die in office as Prime Minister. The next sculpture we have is the Earl of Derby. You can see him here. Now, the Earl of Derby sat under Queen Victoria as Prime Minister on 3 separate occasions, one of only 4 Prime Ministers to have done so. Earl of Derby is the longest ever Prime Minister of the Conservative Party, and he was the Prime Minister during the abolition of slavery. Not the slave trade, which took place about 40 years earlier, but slavery in the British Empire was abolished under the reign of the Earl of Derby. So let's go and see his successor. His successor was one of the favourite Prime Ministers of Queen Victoria. We can see him here. This is Benjamin Disraeli, known as Dizzy by Queen Victoria. He used to flirt with her. He is the only British Prime Minister who was ethnically Jewish. He was born of Jewish heritage, but his father had him converted to Christianity when he was a child, though he would often be mocked for being a Jew. Now let's go and see the most recent sculpture to be placed here in Parliament Square. And here she is, the only woman in Parliament Square, and a very appropriate woman to be the first. This is Millicent Fawcett. Now, Millicent Fawcett was the leader of the suffragists, not the suffragettes. The suffragettes headed by Emmeline Pankhurst, who are more well known these days. She has her own sculpture the other side of the Houses of Parliament. But the suffragists were the more peaceful campaign for women to get the vote in the early 20th century. And we can see this sculpture, which was unveiled about 4 years ago. Courage calls to courage everywhere, a famous slogan of the suffragist party. Excuse me, we've got this, they're cleaning up the sculptures and the square, so it might be a bit noisy here. Now the next sculpture is another new one, put here in 2015. It's Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, leader of the Indian independent movement. He was placed here in 2015 to commemorate the great allegiance between India and the United Kingdom. And one of the great peaceful protest campaigners. And finally, the penultimate statue. This is Sir Robert Peale. Robert Peale sat as Prime Minister, one of the first Prime Ministers under Queen Victoria, but he's actually more famous for being the Home Secretary who established the police force, the Metropolitan Police, the first uniformed police force in the world. And you might hear us referring to our police force as Bobbies. That's after him, Robert Peale, Bobby Peale. Sometimes, more likely in Northern Ireland, you will hear police officers referred to as Peelers, which is also from Robert Peale's name. But the final sculpture is again not a British sculpture at all. This is Nelson Mandela, the great South African president. This was actually unveiled whilst he was still alive. For several years, this was the only sculpture of a living person outside in London. So I hope you enjoyed this little spin through Parliament Square. I hope to guide you here on foot in real life in the near future. If you have enjoyed this talk around Parliament Square, then please do have a look at my other videos on my YouTube channel. Click subscribe. You can follow me on Facebook, on Instagram. I've now got a page on TikTok, so give me a follow on TikTok. You will find me as Rhys Thomas Tours on all of those things. If you would like to join me for a tour of the streets of London, please visit my website, rhysthomastours.com. I hope to see you all in London in the near future, but for now, have a nice week. Bye.